Our mission at Confronting Domestic Violence, CDV, is to provide real-time resources to real-time victims and offer relocation services when parents have a safe place to go and not the means to get there. Every day, countless families wake up in fear, navigating a battleground in their own home, trapped in a cycle of violence. It is a known fact the most dangerous time for a victim is when the abuser knows they're leaving right up to the point of leaving. One of the biggest challenges a parent faces is fear and finances. So while we aim to help numerous families each month by fostering multi-agency collaborations, we're humbly asking you for your support too. Every little bit helps to make our mission a reality for families ready to leave their toxic, abusive environment. No parent should have to leave everything behind or resort to homelessness when leaving for safety. Your contribution can make a world of difference in offering a family to feel safe at home once again. A. Garcia here, and thank you for tuning in. What we cover here is not intended to ignite any triggers. For what you want to conquer, you must confront. So, welcome to Confronting Domestic Violence. Today, I have Carol Ann Peterson with me, and in this episode, we're going to talk domestic violence full circle and her ongoing uphill battle around domestic violence. Many of times, another person's experience can become a life-saving resource for someone else. Welcome, Carol Ann. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, what an honor and a privilege to have you here. I am just in awe of all the work that you have done, all of the time, blood, sweat, and tears you have literally put into domestic violence all your life on such a high level to community level. Today you're a consultant, you're an expert witness, you're a speaker, you're an author, you're a survivor, you're an advocate. There's so much to unpack.
Sometimes you just go where the path takes you and trust that you're headed in the right direction and make the best of it.
That's right. I call that post-traumatic growth, PTG. It is a real thing. It was discovered in the 90s. It's real, and most of us are a living example of it. You are definitely one of them. My
Thank you.
goodness. So I guess let's start with what you're saying, right? Your path just kind of leads you to a place that's unexpected. So based on that heavy, oh gosh, she's gonna have to edit this. So based on your heavy involvement around domestic violence, what was your exposure and or experience that basically got you here?
This is never where I intended to be. This is not what I was going to do for my life work. My mom was positive as a kid. I was going to be a veterinarian because I was always bringing home stray animals. But it was when I was in college that I got interested in political science. And I thought, wow, I like this. I love this. It's how does this work? And where do we get to where we make differences? And doing my master's as well, Loyola Marymount has a public administration that's heavy emphasis on politics. And we had internships in some of the most amazing places. I got to intern with Mayor Doris Davis of Compton, who was the first Black female mayor there. So that was really exciting to do. And so I just went through, did what I wanted to do, and found things exciting, and then had the opportunity for 10 years of being the registered lobbyist in Sacramento for California Business and Professional Women. We did the first spousal rape bill in the country, and I had already been working in Sacramento for 5 years. Nobody knew my story. Nobody knew I was a survivor. I didn't ever tell anybody. In the late 70s, early 80s, those are not stories you told. Definitely didn't tell them in polite company in public. And so we get to our first committee hearing with Lucille Roybal Allard, who was in the state legislature of California. And we had a legislator who's now deceased, so Senator Ed Davis, who is former chief of police for LAPD. And I was telling my story that most of my abuse was spousal rape. And another person testifying with me was Pat Towner. And Pat at the time was the director of the State Commission on the Status of Women. And she was telling her story. And we got to the end, and Senator Davis said, "I'm really sorry this happened to you, but I don't believe a husband rapes a wife. You consented to be in that bed." And Pat and I looked at each other. We looked at Lucille, and I'm starting to get angry. And I'm usually very calm when I testify, you know. challenge legislators. And I was just like, he did not say that to us. No, that didn't happen. And Diane Watson at the time was in the Senate, and she had done a lot of work with us and with me. And she immediately read my signals of I'm coming over the table at this guy, which would not be productive. And so she moved the bill out of committee. And we had a reporter from the LA Times who stopped me and said, "Can I talk to you?" And she tracked that bill every stage of the way. And I give her a great deal of credit. And I am so sorry that to this day I can't remember her name and can't find her articles, but she put legislators on notice, and including the governor when it got to the governor's desk. But I was so angry at how we were treated that I came back to Los Angeles and called the Los Angeles County Domestic Violence Council and said, "What do you do?" And at that time, executive director was Carol Arnett, who's now a lifelong friend. And she said, "So what do you do?" And I told her, she said, "You need to come to the DV Council. We just started a legislative committee. We need you on the committee." She put me also on the training committee. My first speaking engagement, interestingly enough, was at USC Keck Medical School. And I thought, I don't train. This isn't what I do. And she goes, "Yes, you do." And she kept sending me out and sending me out. And then eventually, when I stopped being a lobbyist, I thought, okay, what am I doing next? Where does this go? But while I was a lobbyist, California was the only Business and Professional Women Federation that had a full-time lobbyist, other than the national organization had one in DC. I was fortunate to work behind the scenes, like a lot of us, on the first Violence Against Women Act. The national lobbyists would call me and say, "Have you got recommendations and anything you want to add?" And occasionally I got to go to DC and sit behind the scenes and watch things take place. It's how I knew that Joe Biden was somebody who cared about what we were doing and really genuinely had every intention of passing this legislation, not for political gains, but because he really cared. And so I thought, wow, I have an obligation sitting where I was sitting at that time to realize that I needed to speak for women who could not, and women who unfortunately had been murdered because of domestic violence, who truly didn't have a voice. And everything I did with the Los Angeles County Domestic Violence Council kept leading me in other directions and other places. That's how I got to know Gail Strack and Casey Nguyen when they were both city attorneys in San Diego and starting out and doing the work that they were doing. And it's exciting that about 2 weeks ago, the White House celebrated 30 years of the Violence Against Women Act.
That's right.
Most people don't know it's actually gender neutral. It may say violence against women because that's what we were looking at when this was first passed, but it includes men who were victims. And we've changed it so much over the years, and it's renewed every 5 years for those who may not know. We've included resources and training for the LGBTQ community. It includes upgrading campus security on college campuses, better lighting on college campuses, and even high school campuses. We've included those who are immigrants, whether they're undocumented or legal, to have an avenue to be able to come forward and ask for help. Because in not including them, we're telling them that they don't matter, that abuse is okay, and especially if they come from countries where there are no laws. And we needed to have that avenue. And it's also why we now have a U visa and a T visa for those who are trafficked and those who might be a victim of crime. And so to really see where we've come in 30 years is so gratifying, to know that victims get more and better services than when I left in an abusive relationship in the mid-70s, when there basically were no shelters, and the shelters that existed weren't in the phone book. You didn't call an 800 number. You had to know by word of mouth. I was fortunate. I had a mom who stood behind me and said, "Whatever you need is whatever we'll do." And so in that sense, I'm very grateful and thankful that I had somebody who was there when we didn't really have access to services.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot to unpack right there in itself. You talked about how you were amongst lawmakers while you were in your transition of survival mode, while you're realizing and acknowledging that You're dealing with not just your husband who you had your dealings with, but then also
Mhm.
you're fighting for the rights of women at the moment and in the future. And then with a man in front of you saying what he said. Hold on a second. That's a
Yeah.
lot to take in. And the sad part, the reality is that this may be what 30, 40 years later, and there's
Mhm.
still a lot of that same cookie cutter scenarios happening today.
Right.
We're still dealing with that.
And we've progressed, actually. If you listen to, there's a commercial I love talking about being left out and walk a mile in my shoes. And it's really one of those where we're having to up again the ability to have people not be prejudiced, not be looked at because you're different. And it doesn't matter how different you are, whether you're different from another country, a different religion, even a different ability in terms of disabled or not disabled. And I've learned, I use that term because most of my students who were disabled, that was the term they used, but I know others like differently abled. But that's where you learn, ask people how they want to be addressed. But we're having to reinvent the wheel, which really angers me, that women right now are being very targeted with a lot of not only ads, which reminds me of back in the 60s when ads were all about sex and women were the object to promote all of that, but also watching all the stuff happening in the political campaigns that are going on, whether it's at a local level or a national level. Women are the targets. If you are a female, be prepared that your rights are being eroded away. I can't remember who it was, but I was shocked when there was a legislator who said, we need to take back the women's right to vote. And I thought, excuse me? I fought for that, as did those who came before, like Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul,
Hello.
to say, you want to take it back? You didn't give it to us. We fought for it. Alice Paul and Susan B. Anthony went to jail. Everybody thinks Susan B. Anthony got us the right to vote, but it was Alice Paul and Lucy Burns who did that. But they went to jail for doing that. And so you didn't give it to us. We fought for it. And it's like now they're even talking about repealing the ability to have access to birth control. But we don't have a problem giving Viagra for men.
Oh my gosh. Don't get me started because this is going to go down a different type of journey that I want to keep off of the podcast. But yes, there's a lot of contradiction out there that people are not thinking about on the other side, because I also have a personal opinion, which I typically don't do, but you're opening that door. And specifically on the birth control and the right to do what a woman wants to do to their body. And if something is considered murder, then there should be a policy that is in place called insurance to cover that. Okay. I'm saying it without saying it, but I know you're reading between the lines here, right?
And I think this is where also things have gotten really skewed, because when we were fighting for the right of choice, that was exactly what we called it, pro-choice. And if anybody today calls me pro-abortion, I will correct them. I'm pro-choice. I am not saying everybody has to have an abortion. I don't want you to have an abortion if you don't want to. I want women to make the choice. What works for you? What is in your own best interest? And especially if you're a 10-year-old girl who's pregnant from incest, I don't think you want somebody to go through that physical and emotional abuse as a child. You don't want somebody whose life is on the line because they can't have, an abortion, or they're going to die. And so you're asking people to make decisions about their life that the rest of us shouldn't be making.
That's right. I agree to that. Everybody has their decision to make. They have their conscience to live with. They have their
Yeah.
judgment day to face. We as humans in the flesh are not the ones to put that on them. In my personal opinion, I agree.
And it's the same thing. I want resources out there for women for whatever reason, whether you're looking at contraception, family planning, domestic violence, sexual assault, you want those resources available, which is why I'm getting ready to finish writing an article to post on LinkedIn soon about the Victims of Crime Act. We are struggling to keep funding. And people don't understand it's not just domestic violence, sexual assault, and rape. It's any victim of a crime. Now, mainly it started as a a federal crime. So if you were a victim of a federal crime, it came as a federal piece of legislation. But states have incorporated it into their own, either constitutions, their own rules and policies or legislation.
So hold on. So let's talk about that a little bit because I don't want, let's close up the Violence Against Women's Act. So you were a part of this way back when Biden was like basically drafting it in the 80s. And then I'm familiar that Clinton signed it in 1994. You're saying that it renews every 5 years. I know there was a
Yeah.
lapse in 2018.
Yes.
What
Huge fight going on in Congress.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
so educate us a little bit on two things. A, what does it require to prevent it from lapsing and to keep it renewed on a 5-year basis without it defaulting?
It has a sunset clause. And so every 5 years, we have to go back, look at what's happened, what did we do? Because with any legislation anymore with money, you have to have outcome measures. So every organization that receives funds has to put in every month, how many people did they serve and what did they do? What were the services? How much money did it cost that agency to do that? Every 5 years, and we relook at it. And that's how we've expanded it, because those 5 years we go in and go, what did we miss? What did we learn in those 5 years that we need to put something new in and expand and look at? And I wouldn't want it to be forever. I do want us to go in and look at it every single time. And as budgets change, unfortunately, we have to change the budgets in every piece of legislation, including the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. But at the same time, we need to keep improving. So I don't have a problem with every 5 years. Maybe we could expend it maybe 7 years as opposed to 5, but it is the legislative process. It's what you do. You never have anything that goes on forever, very seldom. But what happens is then every state applies, every agency applies. So a certain percentage of money goes to the states, and a certain percentage goes to each of those organizations in the state, saying, okay, you got this X number of dollars. This is what we're applying for in terms of grant money, and there's restrictions as in any type of funding. So grants have funding restrictions. Sometimes you can't fund the salary of your staffers. You sometimes can't pay for the repair of the roof. It usually is for services. Personally, I'd like to see us give bits of money to shelters for those everyday expenses of repairing a roof or a hot water heater. If you can show that it's justified and needed, I don't want a shelter to fall apart while we're providing services. But the Violence Against Women Act was designed to do exactly that, provide services. Usually it's counseling, emergency shelter, which is where we give you a bed and emergency clothes and food if necessary. Transitional housing, for those who don't know, many victims go from an emergency crisis shelter of 30 to 45 days into transitional. And it varies. It can be 6 months to 2 years. And it is what it says it is. It's transitional. We're trying to get you to get back into society in a very nice way of doing it. So you might pay rent, but it might be only $10 for the facility that you're staying in for transitional housing. They'll teach you how to balance a checkbook, how to do a savings, how to buy better groceries so that you can stretch those dollars. So all of those services are paid for out of the funding. And as I said, it even goes to college campuses for better security, better lighting on campuses, so that we're keeping victims as safe as possible. Because we forget, it isn't just the services of victims, survivors, it's also getting better at protecting women and even men and those who are transgender and those who are LGBTQ. We need to make sure that people have the ability to walk out of their house and feel safe, that I shouldn't have to walk on a college campus and look over my shoulder. But that is unfortunately the reality of our society. And so we do what we can to make things safer, but you still have to have your own safety plan, even on an everyday basis.
That's right. And I want to respond to a couple of important things that you're saying here. Number one, as it relates to the funding that is offered through VAWA for shelters and organizations to provide this full circle of resources for financial literacy. And like you said, in this transitional space, it gets you to self-sufficiency, right? And as a survivor of a double attempted homicide myself, being thousands of miles away from home and literally on my own, I would have to say that it's twofold. As you mentioned before, it's very hard to find a shelter. It's not like they're advertising, and thank goodness, because that's the whole point of being safe. But then it's not necessarily available when you do find it when you're in that real-time situation. And not all the time is the shelter the space where they're providing all of these things that they could or
Right.
should based on the funding. And the survivor themselves, and I'm speaking because boots on the ground here, I appreciate that these resources are available, but a majority of the time when you're in survival mode, it is like literally second by second. I cannot think about what my checkbook is going to look like in 5 days if I don't even know if I'm going to have the money to put food on the table today.
Right.
And so I really do appreciate that those resources are there. And for the listeners, it's most important to encourage survivors and victims that are going through that to really take advantage of those resources that are there, because moving out is a scary place to be, but when you're moving on and in that transitional space, that is that moment that you're pivoting and moving forward. And in order to move forward and to really get to that place of self-sufficiency, these things, you know where you fall short. And you know and you know where you exceed. Find out where you can access these places or these resources that will help you buff up a little bit in that area and gain the knowledge that you need to gain in order to really move forward, especially as a parent when your children are looking at you, watching you, waiting on you, and you're just their sole provider and protector.
And one of the things too to keep in mind is for your listeners is that you don't have to reside in the shelter to use the services. There's what we call the outreach services. So maybe you just need to talk to somebody about a safety plan. Do they have somebody who's available who can accompany you to court? Don't call the day of court and ask for one. You need to call it in
Right.
advance
I'm
because
laughing,
their
but I'm
court,
right, exactly.
yeah, because their court accompanying people are usually booked pretty solid. So you need to call in advance. The minute you get that hearing date, call a shelter and say, do you have somebody who can go with me to court? But they'll work with you on the same basis. It's just that you're almost like an outpatient. So outreach services is what we call it. And so it's important to know that. But it's also important to know that, as you were saying, when you're moving out, that's where a Victims of Crime Act can come available that many people don't know about. There's moving expenses, and it varies from state to state. You need to call your state, either the Secretary of State or the Attorney General's office if your state. It varies from state to state about filling out an application to get moving expenses. And so the amount varies from state to state. The last I knew, and I'm behind by 10 years, California's was $2,500. That's a lot of money for moving. And most of us don't have that kind of money to write a check for moving, especially if you're on the run and you're leaving an abusive relationship.
And I'm sorry, I just want to tell you that's what confronting domestic violence is. That's what our mission is. Our mission at Confronting Domestic Violence is to help you relocate when you have a safe place to go. You and your children have a safe place to go, but not the means to get there, because oftentimes those resources are not there. A bed or a roof or a room might be waiting and available, whether it's at a shelter or a family's home, but the way to get there is for a lot of people the hurdle, and that can result in leaving everything behind, almost, and result into homelessness.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's really important. I'm sorry, continue.
No, that's okay. And it just crossed my mind. Double check with your state in terms of moving expenses. That may include even transportation, because let's face it, sometimes you don't have a car as that survivor moving
That's
on.
right.
And check out every little detail, but they'll cover some medical expenses. They'll cover some of your counseling. Don't let that money sit there when it's available for you. Some states are really good at processing pretty rapidly. Some are a little slower than others. The last I knew for California, they would process anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 days. That's fast for a government agency to process a request for funds. But they know the seriousness of the issue of domestic violence, sexual assault, and other crimes.
Oh my gosh, Carol, I have to say this. Obviously, getting through the trauma for you, me, some others that we walk this journey with, we have gotten through the trauma by confronting it, by mentally and emotionally, physically and financially pouring our soul and our experience into this community. And I just really want to take a moment to acknowledge, because you are running down so many things, this long list, and we are barely scratching the surface.
Oh, yeah. The list
You
is much longer than what I even mentioned.
My goodness, yeah, you're a wealth of knowledge, and this is so important because people don't know what happens behind the scenes, what happens when you're dealing with behind the scenes and your personal life, and then trying to make a change for the future. That's warrior woman status. I just need to say, okay.
Yeah. And I love on LinkedIn that there's so many of us who are warrior women and warrior
Yes,
sisters.
yes,
It takes that community, that network to move things forward. And I know there are times people from the outside looking, warrior sisters, warrior, what? I thought, you guys don't know that it is a war that we have to fight.
that's
Even
right.
after we've survived and we've moved on, there's still a war that we have to deal with. One other side note that's in the Victims of Crime Act, and this is really gruesome, but if you're a member of a family where you've lost a loved one to homicide, there is money to help you hire somebody to clean up your house. I know that sounds morbid, but it gets so overlooked because you're in such a crisis of you've lost a loved one, dealing with a funeral and all of that. Don't let that money sit there when it can help you. That out-of-pocket expenses for anything is hugely expensive, as any of us have experienced, even with a loved one that is not due to violence. So keep in mind that's available for you. Um,
Wow. And that's under VOCA as well?
yeah.
Wow. So I really appreciate that you're emphasizing, because I do the same thing. I emphasize on how important the community is. Sometimes when there's 1-800 numbers that we're given to call, and then it's the number is out, is disconnected, then you keep
Yeah.
on going through this vicious cycle. Sometimes it could just be somebody that is overhearing your conversation at a grocery store, that while you're on the
Yeah.
phone, it's amazing that when you talk about it, the support of that you receive around you that you would never even think was even
Mm-hmm.
there. The emphasis that you're really putting on that community support and resources, I just want to really emphasize on that with you tenfold. And
Yeah.
it's sad that it's still a social stigma for most people, that it's not openly talked about.
Right. And I want to deviate a moment to highlight somebody that you and I both know, and I know him so well and I love him so dearly, and that's Mark Nguyen. For those who don't know, Mark Nguyen is former law enforcement out of Nashville, Tennessee, is a survivor of abuse as a child. His father was law enforcement and alcoholic and abusive. If you get a chance to see the video called This Is Where I Learned Not to Sleep, it is the story of his life. He also had the privilege of knowing Ellen Pence, who he says made him a better law enforcement officer. So he trains law enforcement officers to have that compassion, to understand, yes, you are a social worker. Yes, you are a counselor, whether you like it or not as law enforcement. You wear these many hats. And to understand that the abuser is going to collude, they're going to want you on their side. And as a law enforcement officer, your job is, first of all, keep yourself safe. Why we now send officers out by two, you don't go along. But you also need to keep the victim safe. And so having that compassion and understanding what your role is so important. And Mark is such an exemplary person about what it takes, having been a law enforcement officer, to train other officers. And he is just one of the most amazing people I know. And I feel grateful that I know him. And we don't want to leave out the law enforcement community, good, bad, or indifferent. They're part of our defense. They're part of that first line responders. And so it's up to all of us to help them be better officers. And when you partner, you discover you're also a better advocate. There's this wonderful give and take. And it's one of those where we have to not forget we're not in this alone as survivors. There's a whole other aspect, law enforcement, medical personnel. It is a whole network. We need to make sure everybody gets trained, including judges, and family court judges drive us all crazy, especially when you get that one judge who makes some sort of decision and you're going, what the hell were you thinking? We recently on LinkedIn, and you may have seen this, there's a thread going through of an officer who got arrested for abusing his wife. And they put him on administrative leave. And I said there were a couple of things. One, he's arrested. Is he really in jail? Two, if it's administrative leave, I hope it's without pay. And 3, let's make sure we're sending the message that we're holding him accountable like every other abuser. Doesn't matter if you're law enforcement or not. But you're also going to get those judges who, oh, it wasn't that serious. You're going, he threw her down the stairs. How much more serious could this get? Or police chiefs and not guys for law enforcement. I love you all dearly. And so I'm not bad mouthing you, but I'm showing you the examples of those who don't do it the way you all should do it. Who said, yes, he abused her, but at least he didn't kill her. And we're going, at least he didn't kill her. You really, in print, you said this. Those, we have to choose our words carefully. We have to be
For
so
who?
careful. Pardon?
For who? We have to choose our words carefully for who? To benefit who?
For victim. If you say at least he didn't kill her, that sends a message to victims of, oh my gosh, but this isn't a serious crime.
That's minimizing.
Yes. And so all of us, law enforcement, medical, survivors, advocates, all of us have to choose our words carefully. And especially if you're talking to the press, be so careful what you say to the press. We need to make sure, and no matter what you say to the press, they're going to chop it up anyway, but do the best you can with what you've got. I mean, that's why I get reluctant in talking to the press. Is okay, how much of this are you going to chop up? And is that really what I said? But at the same time, you don't want to miss the opportunity of getting the word out that this is a serious issue and we take it seriously and we want to hold abusers accountable.
And you know what? Again, you said so much in like this, and I want to unpack some things that you're saying here. Kudos to Mark. He needs to be a guest on this show as well. I would really love for people to hear that side of things, just to put things into big perspective. And we do know that domestic violence calls are the most riskiest for officers to respond to. And specifically for California, something you said earlier, that California does recognize that domestic violence is a huge issue and that they're trying to put things in place to do something about it. And recently, July 1st, SB 553 went into effect, which is the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan. And they're talking about preventing, reporting, mitigating, and responding to domestic violence spillover in the workplace. So now regular John Jane Smith are first responders to situations while we have to communicate. It's expected to gather information and communicate and be effective in that communication with law enforcement as well. For corporations, most corporations, not all, there are some exceptions. But for them now to be required to put things in place to help real-time victims coming to work. I was one of them. Work is a place that you depend on, and one of the places you're not really going to change. You can change your dentist, your doctor, your school, your grocery store, your gas station, yeah, all that. But work is pretty much your primary resource for your livelihood. I just really wanted to put that out there because, yeah, California is a leading state and you've been on these committees creating these legislative bills for a long time and we're still going at it. So talk to us a little bit about the fear, the worry, the concern, and what we can do about the potential funding issue under VOCA.
Well, you really have to get involved. So contact your representative. Look at their website. Now, you might not like your representative. They might not be of your party. Look at the website anyway. Look and see what they care about. And this is something that nobody will tell you unless you've been behind the scenes working in legislation. One phone call represents 50 constituents. So even if you make a phone call and say, please vote yes on this piece of legislation, that's good. Just make sure you have the bill number and what it's about, because I'll ask. So SB 533 is what?
553,
give them a little brief description. If you send a form letter, it counts for 100 constituents. If you send a personal letter, you represent 300 constituents.
Oh my
So
gosh.
write that personal letter. And most people don't pay attention when they're sitting in committee. They have a book about this, and it's all the legislation they're going to cover that day on the agenda. When they open to that section, the left-hand side has a cover page. Here's how the party wants you to vote. Second page is, here's the recommendation of your staff of how it affects your constituents. And either in that page or a third page would be, this is how many calls and letters we got. This is how many people represent your district, your constituents. That's important to them because that tells them how they get reelected. Wow, 1,000 people out of my district cared about this legislation. That's 1,000 voters. Now, if you ask staff, they'll deny that those numbers exist, but they do. And They're going to look at all of that collectively, the party stand, the stand from their staff about their constituents and their constituents. Understand that if you call a legislator and you're not part of their district, they're probably not counting your vote. One of my fun stories, this goes back way into the 60s and the 70s, when somebody by the name of Jess Unruh was Speaker of the House in California. And he was standing on the floor one day and he's going through and he's looking at mail and he's dropping stuff in the trash. And they're going, Mr. Speaker, why are you dropping those in the trash? He said, they're not my constituents. He wanted to know what did his constituents think, not the rest of California. Now, if they're a chair of a committee, you can write them from anywhere in the district because they're chairing a committee. It means they have to look at everything. But the individual legislator on that committee is looking at their constituents and what does it do for their district. So keep in mind, you have a role to play, whether you pick up a phone and just make a phone call. Let them know on notice. My favorite slogan out of the 80s and 90s was, we'll remember in November. So if they're not voting the way you want them to, don't hesitate to send them a card. When I worked the halls of Sacramento, legislators always knew when I walked in the door, if I had an envelope, it was a letter saying, you didn't vote the way we wanted you to. I don't understand your reasoning for voting against this. This protects victims. This is in the best interest of community and on. And I would conclude with, we'll remember in November. But if you gave us a vote we asked for, I would walk in with a personal handwritten note card, one for the staff that I worked with and one for the legislator. Those little touches mean something. No offense to the Generation Z who don't quite get that. It makes a difference. Believe it or not, there's still enough people who, even out of Generation Z, who go, wow, I got a handwritten card. That's impressive. Take that extra time and do those little touches. They do matter.
Yeah, most definitely. And thank you for that nugget. Really, it doesn't seem like it's a lot when you talk or when you hear it from people who've done it. And I think for those of us that want to and would love to see this bigger picture and we just don't know the path, I think that's a gap that we can potentially close just by providing some education in each state on how to do some of these things. So before I ask you your wounds to wisdom statement, based on everything that you said, and I have an idea here now, what would you identify as a gap that you would like to take a minute to address or rant about?
I always go back to training. Even for those of us who have been through multiple trainings, I'm always sitting in a webinar. I'm always sitting in something new. My pet issue for me is I had a great grandmother who was Native American, and so missing and murdered Indigenous women is very near and dear to my heart. They are so overlooked. They are so forgotten. And the jurisdictions get cloudy as to who takes the lead on a case. So that's, for me, that's one of the issues I keep track of a lot, even though I don't get to participate a lot. I keep track as to what's going on and what it means and what it looks like. It also goes back to what I would tell my students who would get overwhelmed in my classes. For those who don't know, I taught at the University of Southern California School of Social Work, taught the domestic violence course, which I also created. And my students halfway through the semester going, how do we do this? You know, this is overwhelming. And I said, find your passion. You don't have to do domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health, whatever it is. And I say, and we've all heard this before, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So if you're doing substance abuse, somebody's doing mental health, somebody's doing domestic violence, somebody's doing child abuse, you eat the elephant because you can't do it by yourself.
That's right.
And so my passion just happens to be from personal experience, as is yours, is that this is where I'm working. This is what I'm doing. And hoping that one person made, it goes also back, old slogans are coming around again, and that was act local, think globally, but act locally. This is a global issue. This affects every country. It affects everything on our planet. If you want to stop violence in the street, you got to stop it in the home. But I can't take on the world, but I can take on my community. And so you look and know what's happening in the rest of the world to know that it is a huge issue. But your job is to work in your community and work with those victims and work with those responders, law enforcement and medical personnel. And if you don't know, as the two of us do. LinkedIn is a great resource to make network, to put things out that you want questions answered, even make opinions. It's a great resource in general across the board of many professions.
It really is. And that's how I found you. I was looking for people a couple years ago when I just launched Confronting Domestic Violence. And I said, I know it takes a community. I know I'm not going to be able to learn or do anything that would be an impact if I wasn't able to connect and or learn from those that have created a footprint and are still leaving footprints. And you, Rita Smith, and a few others, I've really been able to really truly connect with, because birds of a feather do flock together. And when we get to talking behind the scenes and we're like, oh my gosh, like what the listeners are seeing now is so toned down to how we really are when we're like,
Yep.
whoa, you know? And yeah, it has just been an amazing journey connecting with you from just a couple years ago, and the numerous times that we have spoken and even connected each other with different people that we know. And now that we're having our first annual gala, and you're actually, thank you so much for supporting us and reposting that and helping get the word out. I really do look forward to learning as much as you're willing to share, because passing the baton and allowing those that have that same compassion, energy, and dedication to what we do in the community we serve, I don't know any other way. So I just want to thank you.
Well, and thank you, because it's always a learning process. I always love when people say, oh, you're an expert. None of us think we're an expert in this field, because we're always learning. Things are changing, laws change,
Oh yeah.
attitudes change. And so I never feel like an expert. I sat in on a new webinar the other day from Spark. I can remember I can never remember their acronym, their whole title, but I always learn something new. Even if some of the information is a repeat, I still pick up something I didn't know before. And yeah, when Rita Smith posts something, I'm always reading it. When
Yeah.
When Debbie Tucker posts something, I'm reading it. When
Yeah.
Sarah Buell will post something, and these are women who were coming along the same time I was, but had that bigger footprint. And so I always go, okay, what are they posting? What are they doing? I feel fortunate that Rita Smith and I sit together on the sort of expert advisory group for domesticshelters.org. And to be able to sit on a group with Rita is always so exciting. And I recently was asked if I would attend the NOVA, for those who don't know, the National Organization of Victim Advocacy. You got to close my eyes so I can see the whole acronym. Their public policy committee. So they have a meeting coming up, and I was invited to attend, and I was so excited. I went, oh my gosh, yes, of course I'll be there.
That
So
is super exciting. Congratulations. And yeah,
yeah, I don't know if it's permanent yet. I'll find out, I think, on the 23rd. I'm hoping it is, but yeah, it's just an amazing group. And that's the other, there are conferences available for your listeners to know about. Pick one. There's so many, you'll go broke. So pick the ones that you think will give you the best. I usually attend 2 to 3, usually the Conference on Crimes Against Women, which is unfortunately 5 days in Dallas, but oh, there are multiple workshops, tons and tons of people as well, great networking. Also, the End Violence Against Women Conference International, they've been around doing predominantly sexual assault, which is important, but they'll also look at other forms of abuse. But we don't want to leave out that sexual assault is just as violent as domestic abuse. And then this year, for the first time, I get to actually attend NOVA's conference. So I'm really excited to be attending NOVA's conference. There are the Family Justice Center conference this year. I'm not going to be going. It's pick and choose where can I go, because remember, when you not only pay registration, you've got hotel, you got airlines, and it's like, okay, you gotta watch that budget. So even if you go to one, pick one.
Yeah.
Go network, enjoy, sit in the workshops, talk to the speakers.
Yeah.
I have never seen so many conferences where speakers are available afterwards. And I think that goes to the fact of as sisters in this fight that we have in confronting domestic violence, that we're so open to everybody. Even if you're a Mark Nguyen, who's a speaker, anybody will go up and talk to Mark, and he'll stand there and talk to you as long as you want to talk to him. Yeah.
What a great guy. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. We could talk for days. It seems like nonstop. Like I need my caffeine, and we just keep on going. I don't know how to acknowledge and like really just thank you so much, me, myself, and I, and so many of us that are out there reaping the benefits and living the rights that you guys really fought for 30, 40 years ago, that you guys were writing and marching and getting signatures and sending in these cards. There's still a lot to do, but we're living in such a great outpour of what your hard work was from back then. So that gives us so much hope, and it really inspires me to keep on going. And I would love to follow in these footprints that you guys have started and are making bigger and leaving behind. And I believe that's what this domestic violence community is all about. We're all coming together and finding each other. Thank goodness to this internet, and we're able to find each other and become
Yeah.
like a full circle of resources. If we don't know,
Mhm.
if we can't do, then at least we can give a referral or be a referral and provide another resource or two or three. Know that we're helping people in a good direction, opposed to, we don't know, the dark cave.
Yeah. Which is what it was when the movement first started back in the 60s, and predominantly is that it was trial and error. I'm surprised we didn't lose more of us along the way, but
Yeah.
we didn't know. All we could do is rely on each other. Is what do I need to get free? What do I need to survive? What do I need to
Yeah.
move on and be whole again?
Yeah.
The new word, actually, which I like, is how do I learn to thrive? So it's those pieces that have collectively along the way over the years have come together, but there's still more work to do, which is why the next generation, we got to pass it down. They've got to
That's
take the
right.
baton. As much as I'd love to do this forever, at some point, unfortunately, it will fall over at a march somewhere and die, but that's okay. It's right. But yeah, when I'm not here, somebody's got to do it. And I don't want them to dismiss marching in the streets. I'd love to see women back marching in the streets again and fighting for. I have to go with my walker or wheelchair, I'll go. But I'd rather the younger generation did it for me, and I'll be home cheering them on.
That's right. That's right. And for that younger generation, so beautiful, so vibrant, such a beautiful outlook in life. And then when reality hits, when things happen, when we think that we're on top of our world, our game, our life, and we get our emotions involved and entangled in the wrong person, we never know. It's obviously, if we knew, we wouldn't sign up for it or say yes or I
Right.
do, go as far as saying I do. But it's about coping, leveling up those coping skills, being better instead of bitter, that post-traumatic growth I was talking about earlier, which is that thriving that you're talking about right now, learning, taking those pains and those hurts into an inspiring motivational strength. And that's where, again, where those warrior women come into play. You have been a ringleader, you're still a ringleader. Give us your wounds to wisdom statement.
Just get up every morning and be grateful. You're alive, even if it doesn't feel like it. If you're still a victim living with abuse, be grateful for the small things. There's a roof over your head. There's a price you're paying for it, but there's a roof over your head. The ability to have food and do the best you can to take care of your children. I know the family courts don't ever look at the victim as providing the best they can, but they are. They're keeping those kids alive. And so get up every morning, take a deep breath, be grateful for what you have, and put one foot in front of the other. Some point in time, it will be better. And if you need us, we're all here for you. You are not alone in this fight, in this struggle.
That's right. And I am echoing that. You are not alone. You do not have to suffer alone. You are not alone. Speak up and you will receive. Thank you so much, Carol,
Thank
for
you.
being here. Thank you. Our mission at Confronting Domestic Violence, CDV, is to provide real-time resources to real-time victims and offer relocation services when parents have a safe place to go and not the means to get there. Every day, countless families wake up in fear, navigating a battleground in their own home, trapped in a cycle of violence. It is a known fact the most dangerous time for a victim is when the abuser knows they're leaving, right up to the point of leaving. One of the biggest challenges a parent faces is fear and finances. So while we aim to help numerous families each month by fostering multi-agency collaborations, we're humbly asking you for your support too. Every little bit helps to make our mission a reality for families ready to leave their toxic, abusive environment. No parent should have to leave everything behind or resort to homelessness when leaving for safety. Your contribution can make a world of difference in offering a family to feel safe at home once again.